Hey, and we're back with the future of the housing market. Will we all be renting from professional landlords? So effectively, like the UK private rental sector, housing stock has increased massively over the last 20 years. And the UK government has ramped up its effort to make the housing market more organized and increase the role of large professional landlords in the private rental sector. What does this mean for small investors and what lies ahead of for build to rent? What are the implications for real estate finance? The first speaker I would like to welcome is Ellis Street. Ellis is the head of letting and marketing at Folio London, one of London's best known build to rent landlords. Ellis, welcome to stage.
Hi, Valentin.
And then we have John Stewart, who is a Deputy Director of Policy and Research at the National Residential Landlord Association, the representative body for private landlords created through the merger of the NRLA and NRLA. Please welcome John.
Hi, good afternoon, Valentin.
Great. And the last speaker here is Avinav. Nigam, who is the co-founder, chief marketing and operating officer of IMMO Capital, a next generation asset that gives institutional investors access to single unit assets. Please welcome Avinav.
Hi, Valentin. Great to be here.
Great. I have to excuse Russell. He got sick last minute, so we wish him all the best. To get started, let's just put a question into the room. Do you agree with the sentiment that the UK government is aiming to drive buy-to-let landlords out of the market?
If you like, I can pick up on that one. I certainly think there's been a string of legislation and regulations has been introduced that have put pressure on small landlords, and also that the taxation regime has changed quite unfavourably from mortgage interest relief restrictions to differential rates of stamp duty and capital gains tax. We have seen some shrinkage in the number of independent private landlords in the sector. Sentiment is generally negative at the moment and low, but the interaction of the government's interventions has almost fixed the size of the private rented sector. So on the one hand, there's drivers for landlords to leave the increased regulation and the mortgage interest relief restrictions. There's restrictions on entry, like the stamp duty differential. But on the other hand, there's also some barriers to leaving, like the capital gains tax differential. So I think part of the problem is the government isn't entirely clear about what it wants from the private rented sector going forward. It knows it wants more owner-occupiers. The route to that would seem to be turning private renters into owner-occupiers. So yes, there's an element where they want to shrink the market, but they also want to professionalise the market. But the basket of policy interventions is perhaps a little confused.
Yeah, I mean, Ellis, how do you see this? I mean, basically, like as one of the biggest London landlords, do you believe it's a good thing that there's tighter regulations and that have been introduced lately by the government?
I think to an extent there needs to obviously be tighter regulation. We all want to be in a position where all of the homes across the UK are of good quality, they're professionally managed. I think that regulation is necessary. In terms of the tightening regulations, it definitely does make it more difficult for private landlords, buy-to-let landlords to enter the market. So yeah, I guess the way it's going, you can see why build to rent, which is the sector I work in, has emerged over the past few years, and obviously it's a massively growing sector in itself. So yeah, on one hand, I do see the reason for this regulation, but it also does make it very, very difficult, in my opinion.
And Avinav, how do you see it?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a great question. I do see that there are changes, as John alluded to, which are clearly changing the way that people have, in some sense, made money out of the sector, or had a career and a profession. I think the way to probably think about this is the customer, and I think the consumers at large. Does any legislation help them? And I think that kind of has to be the primary focus of any legislation coming in, because that's in a way who the government also answers to. I do see, and as Ellis also mentioned, I do see that there is a clear need for a lot more professionalization of the sector. 98% of the housing stock is pretty much fragmented, run by individual landlords. I think there is a clear pressing need to bring some sort of standards, some sort of accountability. Not saying that there isn't self-driven accountability, but I think there needs to be legislation-driven accountability in experience, whether it is a fair dynamic today.
So how do you see other countries coping with tighter regulations? Let's say if we compare it to Germany or the US. And can the UK adopt legislations that have been successful in other markets? Sure.
No, I think that's a great question. Actually, those are couldn't have picked two more differing markets in terms of how they've gone. So yeah, I'll start with Germany, which is very interesting, where we're also present in Germany. We also have our partners in the US. So I think it's worth touching upon those two markets. So Germany is a predominantly renters market. So most cities would have 70 to 80% of the population renting from landlords. There has been a fair amount of protection for renters, in terms of rent control regulations, rent tables, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that in some sense has allowed people to, have a much more, almost a fair, market from a pricing point of view, but also allow them to have long-term, 7-8 years on an average stay. That's the average for Germany, while still maintaining, a good, healthy relationship in many cases with their landlords. So I think there are strong protections for Germany, and that has allowed the rental population as well as landlords in many cases also to have a sustainable source of income. Interestingly, US is slightly different, right? And I think the US is a much more liquid market from a home buying and selling perspective, and also from a landlord's perspective. I think there is there's a certain amount of accountability built in. There's a larger professional investor universe as well, compared to the UK. You also have reliefs, right? So when it comes to capital gains taxes, short-term, long-term, both, there are reliefs built into multiple, in several states across the US, which allows for, a lot of investment to flow into the market, which obviously then helps raise the quality of the housing stock, both from an individual landlord perspective, investment perspective, but also for the professional investors. And I think it is high time that we also in the UK start to look at that a bit more seriously.
There's a tendency, though, to sometimes cherry pick parts of different legislatures that people like while ignoring the other part. I think the great problem we have in the UK is the complexity and fragmentation of those regulations. They're spread over 170 pieces of primary legislation containing well over 400 landlord obligations. And legislation is only effective if it's enforced, and what we see in the UK is a distinct lack of enforcement. But to compare the German market and the UK market, as some of the tenant campaign groups do, and say, well, we want this from Germany, they ignore the other side of the German market. So they want the tight regulation, the rent controls from Germany, but they don't want the tax allowances that German landlords benefit from, and they don't want the tenant responsibilities. For example, in Germany, it's generally expected that the tenant will fit out and kit out a property and defit at the end of the tenancy, whereas the UK market is very much more, properties tend to come furnished, or at least with basic things like kitchens and bathrooms. So I think that the cherry picking that we see is unhelpful. The British property market has a number of unique features. We are much more an owner occupation driven country. Renting is not as common or as accepted in the UK, and I think we have to adapt the market. And I think the government needs to take measures to improve the sector, absolutely, but that has to be backed up with effective enforcement, and it has to be backed up with the right incentives to either attract new investment into the sector to maintain, improve the supply of private rented housing standards that way.
No, I agree. I mean, just for the viewers, I mean, the private rental sector, like, I mean, it grew insanely, I think, from the 80s, 90s, where Margaret Thatcher was introducing the buy-to-let scheme, from what I remember. And it went, I think, from 1.5 million or something like that to now nearly 6 million units. So, I mean, it's insane growth, right? And during that insane phase of growth, I mean, obviously, you know, not everything was super smooth, and, you know, certain leftovers have happened. I mean, maybe to John and the rest, like, how do you see, like what do you think is necessary that private landlords can compete with corporate landlords? Because often as a corporate landlord or asset manager, you have way more funds. You can hire, you know, local tech teams or hire agencies, and you don't necessarily have access to the same resources or capital as an individual landlord.
Yeah, I think the build-to-rent sector is important, and I think the UK housing market needs the build-to-rent sector, but what it can't do is transform the sector overnight. It takes time to build, it takes time for the market to establish itself, and it's going to take time for the build-to-rent sector to diversify. I think one of the potential weaknesses of the build-to-rent market is it's seen as quite monolithic. It tends to be large apartment blocks aimed at young professionals, or the purpose-built student market. I think an area that's likely to grow is probably more supported accommodation for older people. But then again, it's quite monolithic. What it's not offering up is much for families, and it's not offering up much in terms of affordability for people with lower incomes, vulnerability, benefit claimants and the like. So certainly in the short to medium term, we're not going to see exponential growth within the build-to-rent market that's going to see it take over the private rented sector. It just isn't practical, even if the will and the funding and the returns were there. So I don't think, you know, from that point of view, there's too much for independent landlords to worry about. What the purpose-built student sector has done is raise the quality, I think, of the private rented sector student market, but it does also provide a cheaper alternative. So the independent sector, if you like, and the small, medium portfolio landlords are able to provide variety in a way that the sector can. They can compete in affordability, I think, and range of product, and they can also compete in delivering personal service. There's some interesting research out of Scotland following the removal of the equivalent of Section 21 in Scotland that shows actually renters prefer renting from a small landlord whom they know, as opposed to a larger either institutional investor or a large portfolio landlord. So I don't think that the traditional private landlord has much to fear from build-to-rent, but I think build-to-rent is a hugely important part of the market in terms of increasing supply, in terms of forcing up quality, bringing new builds on, and actually in terms of innovation and service as well.
Sorry, Ellis, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was going to say, I do agree with John. I think there's definitely room for build-to-rent providers and private landlords to coexist. As John mentioned, you know, there are different target demographics. The type of housing that the different sectors provide is quite different in some ways as well. But I think the big challenge for both areas is to evolve, because tenants' requirements are evolving so rapidly, and we've seen that over the past year with the pandemic. You know, people are looking for different things now, and I think the key for both sectors is to provide tenants with choice. And I think that's easier for a build-to-rent provider to do compared to, you know, a private landlord, where, you know, as you said, John, I can't remember, it might be you, Avinav, funds are available to build-to-rent providers. Build-to-rent providers have influence over the scheme, the development, the amenities on the site. You know, we've seen it in one of our schemes. We're developing a work-from-home hub, and that's been very well received. The private individual obviously may not have the ability to be able to do that necessarily. So I think there's a massive, there's going to be a massive period of change of both areas being able to adapt to these different challenges. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah, I'll place a small bet here. I think in terms of how I see the sector evolve, again, looking towards the US as an example of how the private sector has undergone many changes. I think professional investors are more and more looking at residential as an opportunity that is just becoming harder and harder to ignore. And what I mean by that is residential provides such a stable, long-term yielding income. And obviously the private sector has private landlords have known that. The challenge so far in building scalable, professionally managed portfolios within the single family market or the single unit market has been, how do you build supply? How do you go out and assemble, 10,000, 15,000, 100,000 homes? And I think if we do look to the US as an example, you have companies like Invitation Homes, which is the largest landlord with 93,000 homes. You have Amherst Capital, which has close to some 3 billion under management. You have Avalon Bay Communities with several million. I think 1.5 billion under management as well. So there's clearly an interest coming up, especially given the situation of commercial, retail, and office sectors that have really fallen off a cliff post-COVID, and clearly consumers, renters requiring a much higher quality of experience. Now, it's not to say that the best landlords, individual landlords, won't continue to up their game. But I think the ability for asset managers, investment managers like IMMO Capital to be able to aggregate thousands of homes into portfolios, be able to invest into those assets, right? I mean, for example, the average energy rating in the UK is a D, right? In terms of this housing stock. So being able to improve assets, being able to invest into IoT, invest into smart technologies, be able to offer the tenants the opportunity to upgrade or downgrade furnishing, be able to add services on top of it, like laundry, cleaning, whatever. I mean, that's something that at scale becomes a possibility. It's not been possible so far because it's the technology didn't exist. But I think with hopefully with players like IMMO Capital and what we are seeing in the US, it will become a reality. And again, to John's point, I don't see that any of these three sectors necessarily will cannibalize each other. I think it's more about coexisting and learning from each other, and how we can, at the end of the day, the single mission is to be, is to provide the best quality housing that we can to people, because it is, one of the three main needs that they have in their life. Everybody needs a roof over their shoulder, over their heads, that makes them feel comfortable and safe. And I think that's what we all want to do.
I think what the institutional sector could provide in the long term is probably the real prize, is the ability for someone to live and progress their whole life through the sector, maybe with one landlord. If you get to that level of maturity where you're looking at high quality apartment accommodation, if you like, aimed at students and young professionals, moving on to family accommodation as people partner up and have families, and then stepping down again within the private rented sector to smaller adapted accommodation, accessible accommodation that deals with the issues that come with aging. I think that is a fantastic potential vision for the sector. I think it's a long way off, particularly in the UK, but I think we are going to see people living long term in the private rented sector, and I think the institutional sector, the build to rent sector, has the potential to offer that through life experience, actually, and allowing people to move potentially with one landlord through their whole life, through those different stages.
Yeah, thank you, John, for making my pitch for me. No, it's absolutely. We call at IMMO, our mission. We say your housing partner for life, because we genuinely believe that needs evolve, and as long as you can maintain a certain quality and have a seamless experience for people to move between the different accommodations, I mean, people will want to stick with you for life, and that kind of obviously offers a lot of other monetization opportunities as well, in terms of insurance and in terms of other services and so on. But at the core of it is a continuity on the experience, I think, that we believe we want to create.
Well, how do you see the structure of the housing market in the next decade? What technology do you think advances this?
Sure. I mean, look, as I said, I think a lot of
the way I see it is super interesting, right? I mean, in a way, like, don't get me wrong, but what IMMO does is more like a modern asset manager that allows to deploy big amount of capital into individual units. With Ellis, we have basically like one of these big landlords that refurbishes a whole area and builds very modern and unique housing. And then we have like individual landlords that are spread all over the country, right? And allow people to have the flexibility of finding the home that they're, valuing, whether this is, a certain style or size or in a certain location. So I'm wondering, like, how you guys see, that the whole market is shifting, like maybe even like generally, as well as on your own segment.
Yeah, I mean, the market is definitely shifting. I think that's very clear, and I think tech is such an important part of that. I think tenants do look for an experience rather than just a roof over their heads. So, people are looking for the newest tech to be included in their apartment. Whether it's some sort of Wi-Fi solution or other things we've spoken about previously. So I think it's all about trying to keep up with that and designing and building homes which are ready to adapt to those changing needs in 5-10 years time. I think we need to listen to our tenants. I think everyone can probably do more of that, listening to exactly what they do need. But going back to my previous point, I think it is about choice. I think we've gone through a period previously where tenants may have looked for price, over everything else. So not necessarily the cheapest, but what's going to give me value for money. But I think now there's a bit of a shift to what is the best home for me and my requirements. So giving them that choice, whether it is choice over the furniture they have included, not just giving them a package, or choice over the items, or choice over the tech, choice over the bells and whistles. I think that's going to be incredibly important. And I think build-to-rent providers, private landlords need to be flexible in that. The rents we charge could shift based on what people want, but I think people will understand that and be receptive to that. So I think that's the way the market's going. I think we all need to have our ear very close to the ground and very close to what our tenants want, and be able to adapt, be as flexible as possible, and make things work.
That's good. Avinav, you were saying something before I interrupted.
Sure. No. I think very interesting question. I think if you just look at the past 10 years in terms of technology and other categories, technology doesn't go through a linear curve, right? Technology goes through an exponential curve. Semiconductors, right, and all the way now to your every word is being listened to. If as long as you say hello Alexa, right? I mean, you get what you want. It's pretty much at a voice command. You have cars parking themselves automatically. I mean, there's self-driving, obviously, which is interestingly become a legislation soon. So I think if you really fast forward, right, 10-15 years, I actually think, and the vision that I see for this is intelligent homes. Number one, homes that know what you want before you know it, right? So being able to order your groceries just by knowing the contents of your fridge and figuring it out, right? Your milk is out of stock, it's automatically ordered. I don't know if you guys are aware of HP has done something interesting, which is a very small innovation. It's called Instant Ink, right? So the printer kind of knows when you're out of ink. If you want to print a document and you run out of freaking ink, like that, I got it for the reason that I didn't have to run to a printer shop. And I think that's really one small example of what is possible here, right? So I think intelligent homes, being able to regulate temperatures automatically, obviously being able to, order your groceries yourself, being able to, self-report maintenance issues, right? So if something's going wrong with the boiler, it gets self-reported and somebody's sent on site to fix it, or you're guided through a video walkthrough of how to do those things, right? Through a remote call. Or if an electrical system goes down, you kind of order the bulb automatically if something goes wrong. So I think I really feel that we, at this point in time, can't even imagine where this is going in the 10, 15 years hence. And that's where I think we come back to professional landlords. The whole price equation, and I kind of respect what John is saying. There's definitely a big section of market that will continue to rent from private. But being able to deliver value, right? It's all about the value. It's the benefit divided by the price in some sense, right? The value that you generate out of the living experience, right? People are spending so much more time at home now, which they were spending at work. People want much more out of the pretty much 24 hours that they're spending there. So I think as you move forward, you will see a lot more of that happening. You'll have a lot more accountability, as I said, of the landlord experience that will go much, much higher. Expectations will go much, much higher. And intelligence around that experience will also increase dramatically. So those are the areas where I see things changing a lot.
10 years is not such a huge time scale, but you're right. We see we've already seen a lot of change in a 10-year period, right? And it's not just printers that are ordering their supplies themselves. Washing machines are at it now as well. you never think actually detergent would be a particularly big issue, but no, you've now got the washing machine that will tell you when you've done however many washes and will automatically order its supply for you. But I do think that climate change and zero carbon is going to be a huge thing going into the future. I think that's where the traditional private landlord sector will potentially really suffer. But it doesn't mean to say that new homes are necessarily the answer either. I mean, the most environmentally friendly home is the home that's already there, that's already been built. It's all very well to look at your energy efficiency ratings once a building's built, but you have to take in the carbon cost of building that new home as well to get an overall picture. So I think as we drive towards zero carbon and we see that energy efficiency challenge coming through, I think that is where we are likely to see a substantial exit of independent private landlords with older energy efficient properties. And there's going to be an interesting question as to what happens to those. Do they pass into the owner occupation sector where there's likely to be some lag before they need to be brought up to standard, or will they be bought up by institutional investors, the Guinnesses of the world and the like, and get retrofitting through economy of scale and just sheer size? Could they pass into the social sector and do something similar? So I think energy efficiency is a huge thing, going to be a huge thing going forward that will shape the independent sector quite a lot and may well lead to quite a chunk of shrinkage there. I think the other thing that we lose sight of, it's all very well for us to sit here and talk about these great technological advances, what we can deliver for tenants, but for an awful lot of tenants, that choice simply isn't there. They are renting due to price. There is effective price controls in the private market set through local housing allowances, and they can't get in some instances decent central heating, holes in the roof fixed, and basic living standards put in place. So I think a discussion about some great automated home that's going to reorder the printer cartridge or have the self-parking electric car in the garage is a bit of a pipe dream for a lot of folks. So the traditional end of the private rented sector, in the absence of massive social house building, is going to have to continue to cater for that section of the market. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a huge affordability issue there. Will the rent levels actually meet the cost of doing improvements, bringing it up to standard? And then again, I think the other thing, it comes back to regulation enforcement and getting the right regulation in place with effective enforcement. And just as technology can have a huge impact on the homes themselves, it can have a huge impact on the authorities who are responsible for enforcement. So much more, I think we'll see much more data sharing. There's a big data project waiting to happen between the likes of HMRC, local authority licensing schemes, the benefit system.
Really sorry, John, to cut you off here. We have running a bit out of time, and we still have two questions.
So just to say, I think it's not just in terms of the homes themselves, but the way that the sector is regulated and police will benefit enormously from technological advancement and hopefully more effective and efficient enforcement of advancing standards.
Sounds good. So a quick question to you, Avinav. Is it realistic for single assets to be a strategy for real estate funds given asymmetrical market pricing data?
No, I think it's a fantastic question. Thanks to Anonymous for asking that. We have as I said, there are two challenges in dispersed portfolios, like the way I disperse single unit portfolios. The first challenge is being able to assemble thousands of units into portfolios, because you're in a way, buying direct from customers. Again, that's where technology and data comes in, being able to pinpoint, the 100 homes in a given week or a given month out of the 50,000 listings you might find on Zoopla, Rightmove, or properties available to buy, is hard, and is possible through technology. Like, for example, we are able to identify within 4 minutes the investment thesis on a particular property, which usually would take a traditional investment manager days, if not a week, to do. That obviously helps in order to move fast, in order to make offers in real time. We've also, for example, standardized the inspection and valuation of a property to 280 data points that get collected through an app. Right. The reason why that's important is you don't need an army of experts going into properties and valuing them. You kind of get a certain level of confidence on valuation. That's one part of the problem statement. The second part of the problem statement is on portfolio management. So how do you manage thousands of assets? Now, that's where the build to rent sector, in a way, has a bit more efficiency built in, right? Because these are blocks. You kind of have the same maintenance person, the same electrical, the same plumber, et cetera, going in, and being able to manage them centrally in an easier fashion. Now, again, using technology, being able to understand, if you're able to invest in the right way into the standardized units, you have the same kind of appliances, the same kind of systems, et cetera, built in. You are then able to manage these much better. So we know, for example, what kind of things lead to higher leakages or leads to more number of problems in certain properties, and then you can avoid that as you assemble more of those portfolios, right? So, for example, if there is a certain unit or type or period, of construction that has a higher likelihood of asbestos popping up or lead piping, or has a higher likelihood of not as high quality energy efficiency, we know how to avoid those at scale, right? So that's where technology and data plays a big role. So it was probably not possible in the past, but I think it's something that's becoming much more.
Awesome. We have 3 minutes left, so it would be good to hear in 1 minute from each of you what your views are on co-living and generally like the co-living, co-work sector. I mean, I guess it impacts all of you, and I've seen this business model working in each market. So maybe John, you want to give it a start?
I think that the pandemic has maybe shone a different light on co-living for some people, but realistically, we are social beings. I think there will be a place for co-living in the future. I think, again, it's going to come down to quality of offer, space, the shared space that's available, the leisure side of things, the work side of things, being able to bring that together in one place. But ultimately, we're social beings. We all have budgets, and I think the combination of those will ensure that co-living's here for a long time to come.
That's good. Ellis?
Yeah, I definitely think there's definitely room for that. People are looking for communities now. We're seeing that currently. As John said, we're all social beings. People want that experience of being able to be part of something. So whether it is in a massive development, whether it's a row of houses, we see it all across the country. People want to meet their neighbours now. Some of them don't, and that's fine. And that's the reason, going back to choice. But I think we are seeing a larger proportion of the market looking for that experience of renting, being part of a larger group. community events, I think is incredibly important in trying to achieve that and bringing people together. So I think it is going to be a growing thing over the next few years.
Awesome. Avinav?
I think there's a clear demarcation between those that are moving away from mingling in society and those that are moving towards. I think both will happen. You will have people who are moving outside of city centers in order to live a little bit more of a rural life. And, we've all seen that. 500,000 people in London over the last year seem to have exited London, not because they want to spend more time in communities, but probably want to spend time in nature. So I think, as I said, I think we just need to keep a track of how, consumer trends are changing and make sure we can create technologies, support systems, infrastructure to deliver on it. At the same time, there are, a lot of, software and tools nowadays for building communities, even though you're not part of a community, but you live close by. There are apps that allow you to actually know what your neighbors are up to and create events and so on. So I think I actually feel that there is both counter trends in the market. It's just about us making sure we keep the customer, the tenant at the center of all of our innovation and advance from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, all of you. I mean, it was super insightful. We will continue after 5 minutes break with maintenance and repairs, how innovation leads to longer tenancies. Big thank you to Avinav, John, and Ellis for the insights. If you have any questions, you can always send them an email, and we will share the recording of the session to everyone that attended.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
See you later. Bye.